So thanks for coming out at the last talk of the day, and I'll try not to hold you away from drinks and stuff. My voice has been going a bit all day, so hopefully I make it through. So this is not a technology problem. My name's Colin. I work for EngineerBetter. We're a consultancy based in London, England. We do kind of training, enablement, general consultancy. We work on Cloud Foundry, Kubernetes, Bosch, Concourse, lots of different things. Personally, I've been working with Cloud Foundry for about 4 years now. Most of my time is spent deploying, operating, and managing Cloud Foundry and helping customers do the same. I do this through delivery of dojos and health checks and staff augmentation and delivering instructor-led training and I've written some e-learning as well. And this job lets me work with lots of different customers in lots of different industries. And I've found that no matter where I go, there's often similar misunderstandings or similar questions being asked to me. So regardless of the company I'm at, a lot of times I see questions like, why is Cloud Foundry so difficult to operate? Or like, why is our platform so unreliable? And sometimes, why hasn't Cloud Foundry or whatever other technology made us more agile, like all the keynotes said we would be? Some of these are misunderstandings, and like Cloud Foundry is not unreliable, but sometimes it can appear like it is. So my response to most of these, what the customer is looking for is a technology solution. So for me to come up with some automation or some kind of tool that will solve the problem. But usually I end up saying, this is not a technology problem, and here's some things that you can do that have nothing to do with technology. So the structure here is I'm going to go through each point and try to talk about some common symptoms that manifest these problems, causes based on my experience working with customers, and then some suggested solutions or some things that I've seen work at different places. So without further ado, the first one is Cloud Foundry is difficult to operate. There's a little bit of truth to this. Cloud Foundry is very complicated, and as a complicated distributed system, you need complicated tooling to deploy it. So Bosch, Kubernetes, take your pick. If you think any of those are really easy, come talk to me afterwards. So usually this manifests as the platform team has no time. They're falling behind on updates, they're falling behind on feature requests to the platform, and is generally unhappy and kind of fires everywhere. And usually the problem is that there's a lack of automation, or there's a lack of understanding in existing automation or poor implementation. But every customer that I've ever worked with who's complained about like operators not having enough time or operators falling behind on updates have had some kind of weird thing going on with their automation setup. Another one is not having a dedicated platform team. So a lot of times companies will move into the cloud and look at setting up a platform team, and it's hard to hire people specifically for that role. So a lot of times what you do is you pull people from different parts of the company. So you take someone from the databases team, someone from the networking team. That's a pretty good strategy to build your platform team, but a lot of times I see it where these people who are seconded from other parts of the business still have all the responsibilities from their old job, and now we're doing this new job. So I worked with a customer where the platform team was effectively 75% of one person who spent the rest of their time deploying apps, and 50% of another person who spent the rest of his time managing an engineering team. And they lived in different countries and very different time zones. And somewhat unsurprisingly, this didn't work very well. Like, they never had time to actually do anything because they were always answering tickets and checking Slack or whatever. And often this ends up being the platform team spends all their time as CF push as a service. So at this same company, devs weren't trusted with production. So they were given no access whatsoever to production, and that includes getting logs. So effectively, the platform team spent their entire life answering tickets to deploy apps and then stream logs out of them and email the logs to the devs and then write what the devs told them into the terminal to fix the apps. And what does this have to do with running a platform that works? Well, you tell me. And another kind of cause to this is cutting corners on training up front. So there's a lot of knowledge that you need to build up to operate Cloud Foundry effectively. And a lot of times I go into dojos and the perception of the customer is, we've bought this technology, spent a lot like integrating it into the business. We want to achieve all of those great benefits that Cloud Foundry or whatever else gives to our developers. So we just want to stand it up, and we'll figure out how all the edge cases work when we get there. How hard could it be? Well, Cloud Foundry is managed by Bosch, which has a legendarily steep learning curve. And nowadays, you can replace Bosch with Kubernetes, but I would argue Kubernetes is similar, at least from the operator perspective. But there are some things that you can do to set yourself up for success. And the first major one is, if you are still deploying Cloud Foundry manually, you're objectively doing it wrong, and please stop. At CF Summit in Philadelphia in April, Chip Childers said that there's an average of 137 releases per month across all Cloud Foundry Foundation projects. Do you think your platform team can keep up with that release cadence if you're doing everything manually? Maybe if you have a really skilled team and you have one foundation. I recently worked with a customer that runs 75 foundations. Can they keep up with this without automation? There's no way. So what you really need to do is change the focus of your team from operating a platform to building tooling to manage the platform. So most of the teams I'm with, the product we actually end up creating is a concourse pipeline like this that deploys Cloud Foundry for us. Another solution, it's a big one, is treat the platform as a software product. So if you think of a traditional software team, like an app development team, and you've got your production instance, you've got some updates, is it ever appropriate to push those updates directly into production without testing them? No, of course not. And no one would ever sign off on that. But what about pushing updates into the platform itself where the apps are running? What if you need to update the Java build pack now? Or you need to scale out the Diego cells, or you need to update a service broker. For some reason, this is a lot more acceptable to lots of companies. But really, if you push things without testing them into production and the platform breaks, it doesn't matter how much you tested your apps, they're broken too. So really, apps in the platform are sort of the same thing. And where you have dedicated teams for deploying applications, managing applications, you should have a dedicated team for managing the platform. So in the old world, you have application developers and you have system operators that manage the platform. Application developers write the app and then they're done. And on the ops side, you deploy the app and you manage it and you manage the platform. And usually these two teams don't talk to each other very much. Maybe they're in different countries or different departments and there's lots of red tape to talk between them. This really isn't what you want to do with Cloud Foundry, because Cloud Foundry gives you the ability, or gives your application teams the ability to leverage the full life cycle, manage the full life cycle of their apps. I used to work for a major retailer in the UK, and I was on the team that made the mobile website. And we took 60% of the traffic to the site, and there were 5 people on our team. We deployed to Cloud Foundry. We wrote the app ourselves. We deployed the app ourselves. We did on-call support ourselves. We did everything. And this was really empowering for us because it shows you from like scratch to final completion, you can pick up an issue and then deploy the issue and see it fixed in production. And also, if you're the person that gets paged at 3 in the morning on a Saturday because some sketchy thing got pushed on Friday night, you're not going to allow sketchy things to be pushed on Friday night. So we had, I think, 5 minutes of production impacting issues in a year and a half, which we were quite proud of. And from the business's point of view, they didn't need a separate team. They just paid the developers and the website worked. So in this new world, which we've called post-DevOps in the past, you've got your application team, where the app developers develop the apps and then also operate the apps. And then on the other side, you have the platform team that develops the platform as a software product and then operates it, kind of in the old way. But these are not two different teams totally separated. These are two teams where the divider is a contract. And the contract is how far up the chain does the platform go? So what things are the responsibility of the platform team? What things are the responsibility of the app team? And the way to do this is to spend your time figuring out the best place in your business for that contract to lie. So on the topic of building the platform as a software product, you can't just hope that someone else's platform is going to work for your organization. So the reference architecture of a Cloud Foundry distribution is almost never exactly what your company needs. And the benefit of Cloud Foundry is molding it to be what you need. So take note of your organization's requirements and the requirements of the people that will actually be your customers, and tailor Cloud Foundry to be exactly what you need. And when you're collecting those requirements, put them in an ordered backlog. So sort them. So the most important thing is at the top, and that's what your developer is going to pick up. And this way, you know that your developers can only work on one thing at a time effectively. If you think you can pick up and work on 100 stories simultaneously, you're fooling yourself. So you order it this way, and you be transparent, and you say, we're always working on what's at the top of the backlog, and what's at the top of the backlog is what's most important to our stakeholders. But how do you keep this in order and keep track of changing requirements while also doing work? Well, to do that, you need a product manager. A product manager is part of the teams. They go to all of the meetings and the planning and the retros. But the PM's role is to constantly interface with stakeholders and customers and figure out what the priorities are and order the backlog in a way that works and make sure it all continues flowing smoothly. So iterate quickly and check that the features that you're implementing in the platform are actually features that people want and value, rather than spending time on things people don't care about. And finally is collaboration. Just having a team isn't enough. You need to actually work together. I worked with a company, a government agency somewhere in Europe that had, their platform team was 6 people. And they were split among 3 different cities in the country, and they had 1 half-hour meeting a week where they actually discussed what they were doing. The consequence was there was one person that had pretty good knowledge of Bosch, pretty good knowledge of Cloud Foundry, and pretty good knowledge of how their stuff worked, and no one else on the team really knew anything. So this sort of works while that person's around, but what if he goes on holiday? What if he leaves the company? What if he gets into some kind of accident? Sometimes you hear this phrase, just the bus factor. Well, then all the learning that that person has done is lost, and the platform team has to struggle to relearn everything while there's a production incident. And that's no fun for anyone. So a way that you can accomplish this is pairing and mobbing within your team. So pair programming, 2 developers, 1 computer, 1 story. Mobbing, 3 to 5 developers, 1 computer, 1 story. And before you discount this as this style of working will never work in my industry and will never work in my company, I've seen this work at some of the biggest banks I know of. I've seen it work at security companies and pharmacy companies and automotive. You name it, you name the industry, I can probably name someone that's succeeded with pairing. So give it a shot and see if it works for you. And this brings me to the second misunderstanding, which is a real misunderstanding, and it's our platform is unreliable. Cloud Foundry is very reliable. I've seen Cloud Foundries continue to serve apps as if nothing was going on for hours while the underlying IaaS is kind of melting into the ground. So a lot of times when a customer says to me, our platform is unreliable, what they actually mean is we're seeing lots of downtime during upgrades, and we're seeing lots of downtime when we're not changing anything, or the same issues keep reoccurring and we can't seem to stop it from happening. Usually, the cause for at least some of these is that platform upgrades are being tested in production and staging. So I worked with one company that wasn't running any foundations before they had customers in their foundations for financial reasons. So they weren't running a sandbox. So every time they wanted to change something to do with the platform or deploy the latest version of Cloud Foundry, something would break, and when something broke, it was actually customers, and it was on a foundation that had a strict SLA, so they were all in trouble. Some of you may have done zero to hero training at a previous summit. This is a really good way to go from zero to like a severity 0 incident in the most rapid way possible. Another cause is not documenting past incidents. So if you have a problem and you resolve it and you don't record, you just pretend it never happened, and then the same thing happens next month, but someone else is on call, all the learnings that you did are lost and they have to redo it. So every problem is a new problem, regardless of how many times it's happened. You also get a lot of snowflaked environments. So this is related to automation. So if you're manually creating your environments, or maybe you're automating and the automation isn't super strict and they kind of drift apart, then you're in a situation where if you test an upgrade or you test an app on pre-production, there is no guarantee at all that that's going to work when you go to production because they're different. Another cause is big batch releases. I see this a lot in big enterprises. And usually it's a fear of failure or overly strict governance on how changes can happen. So what happens is huge collections of changes are crushed together and released fairly infrequently, maybe every month or every 2 months. And this actually really increases the chance of something going wrong. Because with Cloud Foundry, with applications, rollback's really easy. You can blue-green deploy, you can do creative route mapping. If something breaks, you can switch it back really quickly. With the platform, rollbacks aren't really a thing. So with Cloud Foundry, with Bosch, and I'm not as familiar with Kubernetes, I imagine it's probably similar. When you upgrade Cloud Foundry and it gets partway through and it breaks, your chances of rolling back to where you were at the start range from very difficult to utterly impossible, from my experience. So what do you do if you can't roll back? Well, you have to fix forward. You have to figure out what broke and fix it and move forward with it, because all the tooling is idempotent. So how easy is this if you've crushed together a month of work and released it all at once, and you have to dig through 10,000 lines of YAML to figure out what broke? Well, it's pretty hard, especially with all the alarm bells going off. But if you do one feature at a time and release them one at a time, it becomes pretty easy. Final cause is problems further down the stack. So I recently worked with a company that was doing everything right. They had a dedicated team. They had a product manager. They actually had 2 product managers working in tandem. They had an ordered backlog that was continuously groomed and updated. They were writing tests for everything that they could, and they were doing automation from the start. But they kept having downtime. They kept having issues, and they kept having to tell their customers that, sorry, your foundation, we have to rebuild it again. And the reason for this was the team operating the underlying IaaS was doing everything in an old school waterfall manual process way. So all of their environments were different, and all of these problems that I just talked about for platforms was happening with the IaaS. So ultimately, the IaaS should also be treated as a platform product or a software product and have its own dedicated team and everything I've already said. So solutions. Have some sandbox environments. And by this I mean have some environments that customers aren't in. So this is only for the platform team. I've heard it called lab before as well. Because updates to complex systems like Cloud Foundry will break on occasion. There's no real way to avoid that because there's so many moving parts. So what you need to do is give the platform team somewhere to test these updates where it's not going to impact users. And the users for the platform team can be internal to the company, so app developers, or external, which is end customers. And really, you don't want either group to be impacted. Another solution is environment promotion, continuous delivery. So if you imagine a world where you have your sandbox and you deploy it, And then you run some tests that see, is this foundation working and is it fit for purpose for my company? And it passes the tests. So you take that set of things you deploy it with the same automation to pre-production, deploy it, run the same test suite, does it work? Yes. Now you've deployed the same thing twice and tested it twice, you should have absolutely no issue just pushing that into production. And if it fails in production, you just need to fix your tests. So ideally, all the arrows in this diagram should have as little manual interference as possible. Sometimes that's not possible. I've worked with some big banks that have some fairly strict governance models, but you can reduce the amount of manual steps. And setting this up is fairly complicated and varies a lot from customer to customer. But if you're interested in it, come find us at the EngineerBetter booth in the Foundry. And I love talking about this. We'd love to talk to you about how you can do environment promotion in your business. Another solution is documenting causes and solutions to incidents. This leads on from the problem I mentioned earlier. So problem happens, you fix it, and then you write down what the cause was. And make sure when you're writing down what the cause is to focus on process failures instead of personal failures. So for example, if you have an incident that's someone accidentally deletes the production database, the root cause analysis is not this person deleted the production database. The analysis is, why is it possible for someone to accidentally delete the production database? And then once you've documented it, write some tests for them and run those tests every time you deploy. So I worked with a customer that had written a test suite that covered every issue they'd ever had with Cloud Foundry, and they'd been running it for years. So it's fairly comprehensive, and we ran it after every deploy, and it really increased our confidence that what we were handing over to production was good and was going to work, and it reduced some of the production deployment problems we had. Crux of it is failure-free operations require experience with failure. So you want to expose your team to as much failure as possible in lower environments. So when failure occurs in production, because it will occur, because that's how life works, then they actually know how to deal with it. You actually have kind of ideas and debugging solutions from experience where it mattered less for when it matters a lot. Final solution is helping other teams improve. You may notice this is the same image as the previous slide, and that's intentional, because collaborating and breaking down silos are really the key solutions to almost every problem in this talk. So how do you help other teams improve if you've already set up your team as a platform, as a product? Well, the team I worked with recently that I mentioned earlier, they were trying to figure out how they could pair with this underlying IaaS team and help them out. So if you want to help other teams in your company improve, send someone from your team to pair with them on their backlog, and then invite someone from their team to come to your team and pair on your backlog. And this helps foster understanding and empathy between everyone in the business. So now everyone understands the challenges that everyone else is facing, and they can work together better, because ultimately the goal is that the customers of your company are happy. It shouldn't be this weird, like, confrontational thing within the business, which I see sometimes. So with that, I go to the final section, which is a little bit more nebulous. This is a bit more, it's not really a misunderstanding. It's kind of, you go to all the keynotes and you go to all the other talks, and there's really good, legitimate evidence that running a system like Cloud Foundry can really increase the speed of your delivery and digital transformation and speed up your workflows and all of the other kind of buzzwords that you get. Cloud Foundry absolutely does this, but it can't do it by itself. So a lot of times I go into customers and I hear, we deployed Cloud Foundry, but our releases are still really big, deployment processors are still slow, feature life cycles are still measured in months, and applications haven't moved over to it. And really what it comes down to is if the mindset of the whole organization doesn't change, it doesn't matter what technology you bring into the equation, the transformation is not going to stick. So in one of her keynotes in Philadelphia, Abby said that technology is the easy part and change is the hard part. So don't worry too much about what technology products you want to bring in. Worry more about how you're using those technology products and the processes around it. So what you need to do is change from this is the way we've always done it to this is what we need to do to succeed. At one of the banks I worked with, a really good example of committing to this was there was a fairly senior managing director that was really bought into the whole ways of working and the pairing and doing automation from the start. And every time we ran into opposition from some other part of the business on that's not how we do it around here, we'll lose our banking license if we do that, we actually had support from up high to come down and help us out. And that was really helping this team kind of navigate through the enterprise jungle, as it were. So I'll leave you with a quote from Chip Childers in a Computer Weekly article earlier this year. Ultimately, you can't buy DevOps. So approaching a DevOps approach or a cloud ops or kind of a platform as a product approach is all about changing culture. So what you really need to do, rather than going out and finding the coolest new technology to bring in-house, is to spend time molding and improving your existing processes to really leverage the technologies that work for you. And with that, does anyone have any questions? Don't know if we got a mic. What do we do?
Yes, we have one in place. Yes, we'll have one in place. So whenever you have a question, I come to you. Come on, one question. It's a short way.
Okay. Do you have any kind of tips when you try to convince someone to use this new way of working, agile, cross-functional teams? Because I think that's like you said, the most difficult part. And in industries like banks and things like that that are very heavily regulated, do you have any tips how to start convincing such companies?
So the best time to try and start doing that is when you first start using Cloud Foundry. So it's generally a lot easier to kind of build a new team and adopt a new way of working out of the gate rather than later on, because then it gets really hard. But kind of the big, where's I going with that? So like the, had something, but yeah, so the problems that people face usually in setting this up is like there's lots of different parts of the business that need to interact to accomplish anything. So a lot of times having an inception or having a really active product manager to reach out and involve all the different parts. So rather than being an us versus them, you make it a like, all right, why is this existing process the way it is? What are you trying to accomplish? And can we craft a new way that fits better into what we're trying to do, that accomplishes all the same things, but maybe in a different way, and will involve you in the process, and you can come sit with us and work on it. And I found that to work quite well in the past, but it really is a challenge, especially if you find yourself on sort of an island of things that work, surrounded by an ocean of like waterfalls and Gantt charts and stuff. But cool.
One more question, last chance. Okay.
So nice talk. I work as a test automation engineer, so I was wondering if are there best practices for Cloud Foundry testing and deployment? So that's sort of one question. I was already thinking about the answer I would give myself. And so do you use reuse application tests that you deploy on a pre-production environment? So you would deploy all the applications that were running in production and then run all those test suites, or do you do extra work around test automation for deployments of the platform?
Really depends on the customer. Mm-hmm. So usually the way you set it up is that you've got an environment that all the developers are testing on, and you'll like lengthen out, so you'll test So going back a little bit, testing platform upgrades is pretty hard aside from actually doing the platform upgrade. So that's why you need an environment where there are no people using it, because that is your test. So you're testing your deployment mechanisms, like a concourse pipeline, and you're testing that the thing that you're updating actually works, and the test is doing it, so that the next time you do it with the same automation and the same inputs, like you have tested it before. But for testing applications, a lot of times it's, again, collaboration with other teams. So I've been on platform teams where we've talked to the application teams and we've said, like, do you have sample applications or sample tests that you need to run to make sure your application will work in production? And can we leverage that and like add a job into our deployment pipeline that runs your tests so that when you see that our pipeline is green, you know that your tests are also green, and deploy it that way. And then that way the platform team doesn't really need to worry about how these apps work, because that's not your job. Your job is to make the platform work. So it's mostly communication with this, because the like actually figuring out what to test is hard, and testing it is pretty easy. Is that good?
Thanks.
Cool. So if there aren't any more questions, thanks for coming, and feel free to go get some food or some sources.